So there's a topic that I wanted to discuss for quite a while now. And it's a little bit complicated, so please bear with me. This is the key point as to why we suffer so much. And it is based on our confusion about the world around us. Primarily, this is because we mix up what are called causes and results. We see things that are results of previous actions, and then we take these to be the causes. And so we spend all of our time trying to get rid of these things that we think to be the causes of our suffering. But in fact, we're just reacting to results of our own past negative actions. Now, it's difficult, right? Because if you don't understand or you don't believe in something called karma, then it's very easy to dismiss this idea. This is especially the case if one does not believe in past and future lives. Of course, there are reasons why one should believe in the continuation of consciousness, but this is a very difficult topic, so it's not one that I'm going to get into here. As you can see, then it's winter now. It's quite cold in the retreat, and I have the fire burning to keep the place warm. Things change. The seasons change. Samsara, the mundane world, is a cycle. And the theory is that this cycle is perpetuated by actions, especially our actions. But we often get upset because we identify the source of our suffering as being the actions of others. And this is quite mistaken, really. We shape the world we live in. And again, as I said before, it's difficult if you don't believe in karma, cause and effect. So we have to kind of consider this in a different light. What we know is that there is something called causality, right? I mean, people tend to think that the universe just happened randomly for no reason whatsoever. But this is quite a weird idea, the idea that things can happen without any kind of cause. When we look at the theory of the Big Bang, then what we know is that this is a chain of events, right? There's prior actions or a prior input of energy, and this propels us forward, right? Our universe is expanding, and we think that there was some kind of cataclysmic explosion billions of years ago that has propelled this entire universe that we live in. But when we extrapolate backwards, we get to a point where we seem to be lacking a prior cause. And this gets us into trouble. We try to deal with this lack of a prior cause in many different ways. One of the ways that we can deal with this lack of a prior cause is to create the notion of something like God. We go back, we understand there was a great explosion at some point, but then we need to answer the question, what caused this explosion? And so we put it all into the hands or the agency of some supreme, permanent and pure force. For people who believe in theistic religion, then this is a creator God. You have to understand that in the Buddha Dharma, we refute the idea of a creator God. And why is that? Is that out of prejudice? No. It's because we refute the idea of a causeless agent. For example, some being that exists out of time and space who sets the wheels in motion. In fact, what we say is that a causeless agent is an impossibility. Something that is unborn and causeless is permanent and unchanging. And so for a permanent and unchanging entity to be the source of change is kind of crazy. It's a paradox. It doesn't work. We have this same problem when we look back to the time before the Big Bang. We can't conceive of it. We can't calculate it. It gives us a headache. So what the Buddha was saying is that this notion is mistaken. There is no such thing as a causeless agent. So it's not like someone can cause our suffering and be the only cause of that. They themselves are conditioned by their past, by this chain of causality. So I better give you some simple examples, otherwise you're not going to know what the hell I'm talking about. So these days, many people around the world, this is not just an American phenomenon, then they think that the cause of the decline of modern society is immigration, specifically immigrants. Basically that they come into the country and they cause problems. And so what we need to do is get rid of these people. It's quite a popular idea. And it is one of the reasons why there's this phenomena of anti-incumbency around the world. And you may not know what that means, but basically everybody who's in power is getting kicked out. It's because they're being blamed for the state of the world. But what the Buddha taught was, that's wrong, you're mistaken. That this chain of causality has been going on for a long time. And it is the case. Our Western democracies are in decline. Our system of governance is breaking down. And we're looking for somebody to blame. So we blame these poor immigrants. And most of them are people who have run away from desperate situations, war, famine, drought. Many of them basically have been forced into this situation. And forced into this situation by climate change. We know all around the world there's these increase in hurricanes and drastic climate events, droughts, famine, those sorts of things. Now here in the West, for example, when there's a hurricane in North Carolina, then it kind of ruins our lives. It's really difficult. But we have enough support and infrastructure that we don't have to run away to another country. But if you're from somewhere like sub-Saharan Africa, then when your entire life is destroyed, there's basically nowhere for you to turn. And it's not just climate change that is causing people to seek refuge in the West. It's also war. But these are not events that just suddenly happened. And it's certainly not the fault of these immigrants. There is a small percentage of people who are just looking to better their lives. I mean, many people in Nepal dream of going to the West. And so they try to get a visa. And many come. In fact, many monks from our monastery have moved to the West, sort of in search of a better life. I have to say that many of these become quite disappointed when they actually arrive in the West, because what they find is that it's quite difficult. For example, in the monastery, then life is pretty easy. Your food, your clothing, everything is provided for you, and you don't have to do that much work. You will have a job to do, but it's not really strenuous. So when these monks disrobe and then they come to America, what they find is they've got to do things like wash cars or work in abattoirs and kill animals. And it's not very pleasant. It's quite tough, right? Just to get by. They don't realize this. They're not evil people. So we kind of blame these immigrants. We say that our society is degrading because of them. And then politicians use them as an excuse, right, to promote their own ideas. They encourage us to revert to our tribal instincts, our negativities, and develop hatred, angst towards these poor individuals. And sure, there are a small percentage who engage in crime, who are criminals, who are coming over the border to transport drugs, etc. I have to say most of this happens at other ports of entry. It's not on the southern border, if you look statistically. Also, if you look statistically, then you will see that the places that have the most immigrants actually have lower crime. It's a well-known phenomenon that immigrants, when they come into the country, they want to stay, right? They don't want to be chucked out. So they actually commit much fewer crimes than people who are citizens of America, because they don't feel like they can be kicked out, right? But people don't understand this. They're just looking for somebody to blame, so they blame these immigrants. So they see those immigrants as being the cause of the problem. I mean, we can use the same example for Donald Trump. Many people see Donald Trump to be the cause of our problems. But it's the same thing. Donald Trump is not the cause. Donald Trump is the result of a shift in attitude and opinion in the country. The American people chose him. Anti-incumbency is a result. It's not a cause. People have become fed up in the modern world. And because of this, they're looking for somebody to blame. And who better to blame than those who are in charge? I mean, if you look again at the actual figures, then what we know is the American economy has the greatest and the best recovery of any nation in the entire world post-COVID. In fact, the American economy is the envy of the world. But we think it's the worst. We think that we're turning into a third world country. Well, the world is changing. And the world is changing because of our previous karmic acts. For example, Westerners spent centuries destabilizing places like Africa by trading guns for slaves. And they were doing this in order to become rich, right? And to gain control and power. That's what we've been doing throughout history. But the consequence is we have a lot of destabilized countries, and we have got a lot of war around the world. I'd have to say that the West is primarily responsible for these global wars. Of course, there's always been conflict, but the scale and proliferation of war has been largely down to the strength of our Western economies. Really, war is fueled by economy. Two small tribes can bang each other on the head with clubs and sticks, but the problem only really gets out of hand when we start throwing around nuclear weapons, etc. And so it's our progress that has caused us to destabilize the world, and because of this, then there are many, many, many people who are disinherited, disenfranchised, and are looking for a better life. And it's quite desperate. I mean, if it's desperate for people in the West, imagine what it's like for people in third world countries. And then a lot of people, they don't even want to hear this kind of talk. They think if you even suggest that we did something wrong historically in the past, then that's going to traumatize me. And so you shouldn't say it. But that's foolish. Abandoning history is pure ignorance. In general, then it's very evil people who want to revise history, who want to ignore the past. We are much better off learning from the past. Because if we learn from the past, then there's a chance we can avoid the same errors that we made previously. And this is where we are right now, folks. We are ignoring the past. We are just looking for somebody to blame in the present moment. And we are propelling ourselves into very dark times. It's better to recognize one's past actions and to recognize that negative actions have negative consequences. Once one has this recognition, then one will apply oneself to virtue. And in the future, having applied oneself to virtue, then we will experience well-being. This is how it goes. This is the truth of things. 100 years ago, the world was a very dark place. We had a succession of wars, world wars. For example, in World War I, something like 17 million people died. That's not the kind of casualties you're going to get from some kind of tribal skirmish in the outback of the Congo. But sadly, we're falling for it yet again, because our politicians are encouraging us to violence and hatred. And it is this hatred that will be the most destructive cause, the cause of our future suffering. Hatred and greed, jealousy and pride, all of these things lead to eventual suffering and hardship. But we don't get it. We think our anger and our hatred is directed outwards towards others and harms them. But really it burns up one's own mind. A world without love and compassion is a very dark and frightening place. Imagine a world that never experienced great teachers like Jesus Christ and the Buddha, never experienced the wise sages who taught love and compassion, tolerance and wisdom. But samsara is a wheel, and it keeps turning. And as long as we keep putting in our negative energy, our negative karma, then there is no end to mundane suffering. What we need to do is to achieve transcendence. That is, to get off this relentlessly turning wheel of pain. Transcendence means to transcend the ego, and there are many methods that allow us to achieve transcendence. And exactly which method suits which individual is not certain. It depends very much on that person's disposition, their natural character. Now, the start of the journey is to recognize that things are not satisfactory. Things are not okay the way they are. But once you recognize that things aren't satisfactory, then what you mustn't do is jump to wild conclusions. And unfortunately these days, then that's just about all that people are doing. We're unhappy, and then we look to unreliable sources to give us information. For example, many people think that Joe Rogan is an expert on just about everything in the world. But if you listen to what he's saying, he's mostly spreading a lot of conspiracy theories, and he's spreading a lot of disinformation. It's the same in the spiritual path. If you look on YouTube, most of the teachers are just spreading disinformation. And we put our trust in these things. And what they do is they lead us astray. It's the same with false teachers. What they do is they sell people an easy answer. We're not happy. We don't like the way things are. We recognize suffering, okay? Nobody needs to be taught about suffering. We all understand suffering. But then there's these kind of self-interested, they're not necessarily con men, but self-interested individuals, right? The reason why people like Joe Rogan just spread all this disinformation is because they don't really care what they say. The more controversial it sounds, then the more followers they'll get and the richer they'll get. So it's kind of a way of living, right? It's a way of padding their own pockets. And they're not careful about what they say. They just repeat things that they've heard. And then we hear this and we believe it. And it gets us into a lot of trouble. For example, many people are spreading anti-vaccine disinformation. And as we know these days, then there's been a resurgence of polio and measles and all kinds of diseases. And one of the biggest contributing factors to this is disinformation about vaccines. So basically we trust people who have no expertise in the subjects that they're teaching, they're talking about. And we have lack of trust, or we distrust the experts, the people who know what they're talking about. It's one of the signs of the age of degradation that the Buddha taught. That is the degradation of view, the decline in view, where we see black to be white, we see good to be bad, we see the wise to be ignorant, and we see the ignorant to be wise, and that's very much where we are. I'm not saying that we are entering the Kali Yuga, the age of disputes. It's possible. But we are certainly approaching dark times. And so what you need to do, once you've recognized that things are not suitable, they're not satisfactory, then you need to sincerely look for answers. And don't just accept the trite statements that anyone gives you. That's why I say I don't give my time to conspiracy theories. Sure, there are conspiracies, but there are infinite conspiracy theories, and they can't all be right. And there's the danger of getting sucked down a rabbit hole. And I think that's where most people are these days. They've been sucked deep underground into a rabbit hole, like Alice in Wonderland, and they can't get out. They can't see the light of day. My suggestion to you is to put down your smartphone, switch off Twitter. I mean, Twitter is one of the worst. It's just pumping out negative disinformation and propaganda. But there's many platforms just like it. Put it aside. Go outside into the forest, into your community. Speak to your neighbor. Have meaningful engagements and relationships. Breathe the fresh air, for Christ's sake. If we keep going in the direction we're headed, then you won't like it. The consequences of us falling sway under our negative emotions, falling sway to our anger and our resentment, our hatred, are really frightening. Don't encourage this. Don't allow yourself to be triggered and get angry. Never forget that others, like you, are also suffering, and that other sentient beings are limitless, and you are only one. Remember the words of the Buddha and Jesus Christ. Never abandon another, and never lose your love. Well, the sun is coming up now, and I've got quite a lot of work to do here at the Hermitage, so I'd better get on with it. So good luck with your meditation, and see you next time.